No one in the small town of Graybridge ever paid much attention to the old maid who worked at the edge of the valley house. She came and went like a shadow in the early morning mist, always quiet, always polite, always invisible in the way people choose not to see what they don't understand. Her name, if anyone bothered to ask, was Eleanor Vance, but most people simply called her the maid. She never spoke more than a few words. She never complained, and she never asked questions. The house she worked had been abandoned for years before she arrived, yet somehow it was always clean, the lights always faintly glowing at night, and the garden always strangely alive even in the harshest seasons. The townspeople whispered about her, of course. Some said she had nowhere else to go. Others said she was touched by grief. A few even joked that she might not be entirely real. But no one truly knew the truth, not until the night the Black Ops team arrived. It began without warning. A convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled into Graybridge just after midnight, their headlights cutting through the fog like sharp blades. Men dressed in tactical gear moved with silent precision, surrounding the old valley house as if it were a high-security target. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were trained for operations that never made the news, missions that were erased before dawn. And yet, they were there for her. Inside the house, Eleanor continued her routine as if nothing was wrong. She folded laundry with careful hands, humming a soft tune no one had heard before. The radio on the counter flickered on by itself, playing a frequency that didn't belong to any local station. Then, suddenly, every light in the house dimmed at once. Outside, the commander raised his hand. "She's here," he said quietly, almost with relief. One of the operatives stepped forward. "Sir, are we sure about this?" The report said she's been here for decades. No records, no identity matches, nothing. The commander didn't take his eyes off the house. That's because she was never supposed to have one. At that moment, the front door opened slowly. Eleanor stood there, calm and unshaken, her pale eyes reflecting the glow of the tactical lights. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. In fact, she looked as if she had been expecting them all along. "You're late," she said softly. The words hit the team harder than any weapon could. One of the younger agents whispered, She knows us?" The commander stepped forward carefully. "Eleanor Vance, or whatever name you go by. We've been searching for you for 12 years. A faint smile touched her lips, but there was something strange in it, something distant, something not quite human. 12 years for you," she replied. "For me, it has been much longer." The wind outside suddenly stopped. Even the fog seemed to freeze in place. One of the operatives checked his scanner, his face going pale. "Sir, she's not registering as human." Silence fell. Eleanor's gaze shifted slightly, as if looking past them, beyond them, into something none of them could see. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly. "Not after what you buried here." And in that moment, the truth the Black Ops team had been sent to uncover finally began to wake. No one in the team had expected the woman to speak like that. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was something closer to disappointment, like she had seen this moment coming long, before any of them were even assigned a mission. The commander kept his stance firm, but something in his eyes shifted for a fraction of a second. He had been briefed for years on what they might find here, yet nothing in those files had ever prepared him for the calm presence standing in front of him now. "Ma'am," he said carefully, lowering his tone, "we didn't come here to disturb you. We came for answers." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she slowly stepped back, allowing the door to open wider. "Answers were never left here for you," she said. "Only consequences." Inside the house, everything looked ordinary at first glance. A wooden table, neatly folded cloths, a kettle softly steaming, as if someone had just turned it off. But the Black Ops team noticed something strange immediately. Their equipment flickered the moment they crossed the threshold. Radios lost signal. Night vision distorted. Even their wrist monitors began showing incorrect readings, as if the house itself rejected their presence. One of the younger operatives swallowed hard. "Sir, this wasn't in the report." "No," the commander replied quietly, "because the reports were rewritten." That sentence hung in the air longer than it should have. Eleanor moved slowly through the room, her footsteps silent against the wooden floor. "You've been calling it the Valley House," she said softly, "but it was never just a house. Not after Black Ridge." At the mention of that name, every member of the team tensed. Black Ridge, a mission that officially never existed. A classified operation from 12 years ago, where an entire reconnaissance unit disappeared during a surveillance sweep in these exact hills. The official record stated environmental collapse. But whispers inside military circles told a different story, of something unseen in the fog, something that answered back when spoken to. The commander exhaled slowly. "We recovered fragments of audio," he admitted, "before the signal was lost. A voice guiding them out, keeping them alive long enough to reach extraction points that shouldn't have existed." He paused, looking directly at Eleanor. "And every fragment matched yours." For the first time, her expression changed, just slightly. Not surprise, not denial, something closer to memory. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like distant footsteps. One of the operatives glanced toward the darkness beyond the glass and froze. "There's movement out there," he whispered. But when they looked again, there was nothing. Eleanor turned toward the window anyway. "They didn't all make it out," she said quietly. "Some were never meant to leave that ridge, and some were never meant to come back here asking questions." The commander stepped forward. "Then tell us what happened that night. Tell us why your name appears in files that say you don't exist." For a moment, the room grew colder. The kettle stopped steaming. The lights dimmed as if something unseen had drawn the energy away. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I died there." Silence fell so hard it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. And from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, something slowly answered back. No one in the room moved after Eleanor said those words. "I died there." It didn't sound like drama or exaggeration. It sounded like a fact she had carried for too long, finally spoken out loud. The Black Ops team exchanged uneasy glances, each man trying to understand what kind of mission this really was turning into. The commander didn't lower his gaze. "That's not what our intelligence says," he replied. "Your biometrics were never recorded as deceased. No body was ever recovered. No confirmation." Eleanor gave a faint, tired smile. "Because there was nothing left to recover in the way you understand it." A low hum suddenly passed through the house again. This time it wasn't subtle. It felt like something shifting beneath the foundation, like the valley itself was breathing. One of the operatives stepped back instinctively. "Sir, the seismic scanner is spiking again," he said. "It's the same readings we got during Black Ridge." At the mention of that mission, tension tightened across the team. Black Ridge was supposed to be a failed surveillance sweep, nothing more. But the deeper they stood in this house, the more that official version felt like a carefully built lie. Another operative, younger and visibly shaken, spoke up. "If she died there, then how is she standing here? How is she talking to us right now?" No one answered him. Instead, Eleanor walked slowly toward the center of the room, as if drawn by something only she could feel. "You were never supposed to return to this place," she said. "Not because of danger, but because of memory." The commander narrowed his eyes. "Explain." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her attention drifted toward the far wall, where old photographs hung slightly crooked, dust-covered images of people the team didn't recognize. Soldiers, civilians, and one particular group standing near a fog-covered ridge. Eleanor pointed at the photo. "That was the last extraction attempt," she said. "They came for the unit you lost. But the valley didn't allow them to leave either." One of the operatives frowned. "What do you mean didn't allow?" She turned slowly toward him. "Some places don't just hide things. They keep them." A sudden crack echoed from below the floorboards again, sharper this time. The lights flickered violently. The radios on the team's gear burst into static, then died completely. The commander raised his hand. "Hold position," he ordered, though even his voice carried uncertainty now. Outside, the fog thickened unnaturally fast, pressing against the windows like something alive. One of the men whispered, "We're losing perimeter visibility." But Eleanor didn't react to any of it. Instead, She moved to an old wooden door at the back of the room. A door no one had noticed before. "I didn't call you here," she said quietly. Something else did. The commander stepped forward immediately. "That door wasn't on the blueprints." "It wasn't meant to be," she replied. One of the younger operatives raised his weapon slightly, unsure whether to treat this as threat or anomaly. "Sir, what is behind that door?" Eleanor placed her hand gently on the wood. For a brief second, the entire house fell silent again. Even the strange hum stopped. Then she spoke one final line, barely audible. "Everything you buried at Black Ridge is still waiting." And slowly, the door began to open from inside. The moment the door began to open, it didn't creak like an ordinary wooden frame. It moved as if something on the other side was gently pushing back, testing the boundary between two worlds. The Black Ops team instinctively raised their weapons, forming a tight formation behind the commander, but none of them fired. Something in the air made them hesitate, like every trained instinct was suddenly being questioned by something they could not classify. Eleanor stood still, her hand resting on the door, as though she wasn't opening it, but allowing it. "No one steps forward unless I say so," the commander ordered sharply, though even his voice carried strain now. The younger operative swallowed hard. "Sir, we should abort. This is beyond protocol." "There is no protocol for this," the commander replied without looking away from the door. The opening widened slowly. A cold wave of air slipped through, carrying a smell that didn't belong to any normal place, metallic, damp, and strangely familiar, like burnt soil after a storm. From inside, there was no visible room at first, only darkness. But it wasn't empty darkness. It moved. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Black Ridge didn't end when you left it. It continued in layers." One of the operatives adjusted his goggles. "I'm getting interference again," he muttered. "It's like something is rewriting the signal every few seconds." Then, faintly, a sound came from inside the doorway. Voices. Not clear words at first, just fragments. Broken calls. Distant commands. Static mixed with human panic. It sounded like a recording trapped in time, repeating itself under pressure. The commander's grip tightened. "Those are extraction logs," he said slowly, "but they were sealed and erased." Eleanor nodded once. "Erased from your records, not from here." The darkness inside the doorway shifted again, and for a brief moment, shapes could be seen. Silhouettes of people moving without direction, as if walking through memory instead of space. Some stopped, some turned toward the light. None of them fully stepped out. One of the operatives took an involuntary step back. "Sir, those uniforms, they're ours." No one responded. The younger man's breathing became heavier. "That's impossible. That unit was declared missing." Eleanor's eyes lowered slightly. "Missing is what you call things you don't want to admit are still present." The commander finally looked at her directly. "What are you trying to show us?" Before she could answer, the house trembled again, this time harder. The windows rattled violently. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams. The fog outside pressed closer, until the glass itself seemed like the only barrier left between reality and something else entirely. A new sound rose from the doorway. Not voices now. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. One of the operatives raised his weapon fully. "We've got movement inside. Multiple signatures." But the scanner didn't behave normally. Instead of identifying targets, it flickered between human, unknown, and unreadable symbols. The commander took a step forward. "Eleanor, if this is containment, why bring us here now?" For the first time, her expression showed something like urgency. "Because containment is failing." The words landed heavily. The lights in the house flickered again, longer this time. And in that unstable glow, the doorway inside the old wooden frame widened just enough for something to become visible. Not fully, not yet, but enough to understand one terrifying thing. Whatever was inside had been waiting for them to look long enough to see it back. And as the commander raised his hand to signal retreat or advance, even he didn't know which was correct anymore, the first figure finally stepped closer to the threshold. The moment that first figure stepped closer to the threshold, the entire team felt it at the same time, a pressure in the air, like reality itself tightening around them. No one gave command, but every weapon locked onto the doorway. The figure was still not fully visible. It looked human at first glance, but something about its movement was wrong. Too smooth, too delayed, like it was remembering how to walk instead of actually walking. Then it stopped just at the edge of the door and spoke. "Commander, you're late." The voice was clear enough to recognize. The commander froze. "That voice," one of the operatives whispered, "that's Captain Rayhan's call sign frequency." He was par Black Ridge. A heavy silence dropped across the room. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment. "He was not meant to answer," she said softly. The figure stepped forward slightly, and in that instant, the shape became clearer. A uniform, torn in places, covered in dust that didn't look like ordinary dirt. The face was partially visible, but it didn't look fully present, like it was still being formed by memory rather than flesh. The commander's voice turned lower. "Rayhan, report your status." The figure tilted its head. "Status." It repeated slowly, as if the word was foreign. Then, suddenly, the lights in the house surged violently. Every device the team carried flickered at once. A sharp burst of static filled their earpieces, followed by overlapping voices speaking at the same time. Not random voices, their own voices. The operatives began reacting immediately. "That's my voice." "I never said that." "Those are our mission logs." The younger operative backed away. "Sir, this isn't possible. This is psychological interference. Some kind of projection." But Eleanor shook her head. "It's not projection," she said quietly. "It's recovery." The commander turned sharply toward her. "Recovery of what?" Before she could answer, another sound echoed from deeper inside the doorway. Footsteps again, but this time many more. Slow, uneven, growing closer in layers, like an entire formation was approaching from somewhere beyond sight. The darkness inside the doorway began to shift more violently, as if something was pushing against it from the other side. One of the operatives raised his weapon higher. "We're getting multiple heat signatures now. But they're not stable, they're flickering like they're not fully in our dimension." The commander's jaw tightened. Eleanor wooded Black Ridge open. For the first time, her calm broke slightly. Not fear, but something closer to regret. "It didn't open anything," she said. "It tore something apart." The figure at the doorway took another step forward, and then another. With each step, more details became visible. More uniforms, more silhouettes behind it. Not just one soldier anymore. There were others, some familiar, some unrecognizable, all moving in the same unnatural rhythm, as if tied to a single memory that had never stopped replaying. The younger operative whispered, "Sir, they're not attacking." "No," the commander said slowly, watching carefully. "They're waiting." Then, without warning, the figure that looked like Captain Rayhan raised his head fully and said something that changed everything. "They are still inside us." The words didn't make sense at first, but then Eleanor's expression shifted completely, and she finally spoke the truth she had been holding back since the beginning. "Black Ridge wasn't a mission," she said. "It was a breach." The entire room seemed to stop breathing. "And you didn't recover survivors," she continued. "You carried part of it back with you." The commander's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." But even as he said it, one of the operatives suddenly froze. His scanner began screaming with static, and slowly, his own reflection in the broken screen behind him started moving a fraction too late. The moment the operative saw his reflection move a fraction too late, the entire room snapped into full panic. "Sir, something's wrong with my suit feed," he shouted, stumbling backward. But the commander didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the doorway, on the growing number of figures standing just beyond it. Soldiers who were not fully alive, yet not fully gone either. Black Ridge had never been a simple missing mission. It had become something that stayed behind in people, in memories, in fragments of reality that refused to settle. Eleanor stepped forward at last, and for the first time, her voice carried something firm. "This ends now." The room went silent again. Even the figures in the doorway stopped moving. The commander turned toward her. "You said you died there. You said this was containment. Then tell me what we're dealing with." Eleanor looked at him directly, and something in her expression finally softened. "You're dealing with what was left behind when a place refused to close," she said. Black Ridge wasn't destroyed. It was split between what you remember and what you buried. A deep tremor rolled through the floor. The doorway widened one final time. And this time, everything became visible. Not just soldiers, not just fragments, but an entire layered space behind reality itself. Echoes of the mission repeating endlessly, trapped like a loop that never ended. Every lost operative, every failed extraction, every forgotten voice was still there, suspended in a place that didn't age. The younger operative whispered, "So they're alive?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Not alive. Not gone. Just held." The commander stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly for the first time. "Then why bring us here now?" Eleanor hesitated. "Because the breach is widening," she said quietly, "and it's starting to pull everything connected to it back in." As if responding to her words, one of the figures in the doorway began to fade. Then another. The structure behind them trembled like it was collapsing inward. The commander understood instantly. "This house," he said. "It's the anchor." Eleanor nodded once. Silence fell. Then, slowly, she walked toward the doorway, not away from it. The operatives reacted immediately. "Ma'am, don't move." But she didn't stop. "I was never meant to leave Black Ridge," she said. "I was what kept it from spreading." The commander raised his hand. "Eleanor, wait." But she turned back one last time. And for the first time, she didn't look like a ghost. She looked like someone holding something back from breaking. "If I step back inside," she said, "it closes again." The commander froze. "You'll be trapped," he said. A faint smile crossed her face. "I already am." And then she stepped through. The doorway collapsed inward instantly, like a wound sealing itself shut. The house shook violently, then went completely still. The fog outside began to lift for the first time in years. The operatives stood frozen, unsure if they had just witnessed a rescue or a loss. Then the commander's radio crackled. Once, twice, and a familiar voice came through the static. "Calm, soft, close, containment restored." Everyone turned sharply toward the commander's device. But the final twist came in the reflection of the broken window, because standing behind the commander now was Eleanor, and she wasn't alone anymore. The moment the commander saw Eleanor standing behind him in the broken window reflection, his breath stopped for a second. His hand instinctively moved to his weapon, but something stopped him from raising it fully, because this Eleanor didn't feel like the one who had just stepped into the doorway. She felt different, calm, stable, present. The operatives also turned slowly, confused and shaken. "Sir, she was just inside," one of them whispered. "We saw her go through." The commander didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on her reflection, then slowly shifted back to the woman standing in front of him. Two Eleanors. Same face, same presence. But only one carried the weight of something no human explanation could fully contain. The Eleanor inside the house spoke first. "It's over," she said softly. The radio in the commander's hand crackled again, then stabilized into silence. The strange interference that had filled the valley house, the flickering signals, the shifting readings, all of it began to fade. Outside, the fog that had surrounded Graybridge for years slowly began to lift, revealing a valley that looked ordinary again. No more unnatural silence. No more pressure in the air. Just land, wind, and distance. One of the younger operatives lowered his weapon completely. "It's clearing," he said in disbelief. The commander finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "Black Ridge." Eleanor, both versions of her, looked at him, and for the first time there was clarity in her answer. "Closed," she said. The reflection in the window began to fade slowly, like a memory losing its grip. The Eleanor who had stepped through the doorway was not gone, but no longer separated. It was as if something had finally been integrated, settled, accepted. The house itself changed too. The strange hum disappeared. The unnatural cold lifted. Even the wooden walls looked less like barriers and more like simple structure again. The commander exhaled deeply, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "Report status," he said automatically, almost out of habit. But no one answered with data or readings this time. Instead, the younger operative spoke quietly. "We don't have a category for this, sir." A faint, almost tired smile appeared on Eleanor's face. "Then don't classify it," she said. "Just remember correctly." The commander looked at her for a long moment. "And you?" Eleanor glanced toward the valley outside the window, now fully visible and calm. "I stay where I am needed," she said, "not where I am buried." The second reflection of her in the glass finally disappeared completely. No one moved for a few seconds. The silence felt different now, no longer heavy but settled. The commander finally lowered his weapon fully. "Black Ridge incident is closed," he said quietly. Officially, as the team began to withdraw, the house no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a place that had been holding something together for too long and was finally allowed to rest. Before leaving, the commander looked back once more. Eleanor stood at the doorway, watching them go, not as a ghost, not as a mystery, but as someone who had carried an impossible burden and finally set part of it down. And then she spoke one last time. "Some places don't haunt people," she said. "They wait for someone to understand them." The door closed gently behind her, and as the Black Ops team left the Valley House behind, Graybridge slowly returned to what it had always been meant to be, just a town with stories people would never fully believe. But none of them ever forgot what they saw that night, because some operations don't end with victory or loss. Sometimes they end with understanding. And in the quiet of the valley, Eleanor remained no longer a ghost, but something far harder to define. A reminder that not everything buried is gone, and not everything returned is truly human in the way people expect.